Opponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Neutral, not more than 5 minutes each. Rebuttal by the applicant, not more than 10 minutes each, at which time I will close the public testimony. Any more questions that we might have, we'll have a discussion and deliberation, and then a decision will be rendered. So, Brian?
Okay, I apologize without a PowerPoint because it's very difficult for me to actually give a presentation when I'm not looking at something. So I encourage you to look at the site plan that's in your staff report if you need to. But this request is for a subdivision consisting of 6 lots. It's in a low-density R1 zone, so it's intended for detached single-family homes. It's in an area that does have existing surrounding low-density uses, and it's an area that, when developed, will help supply street connectivity in the area, because North Oak Street currently dead ends just north of 14th Avenue, running east-west, and then coming down from the north on North Oak Street, it has dead ends to a couple houses there, and so it will complete the gap in that street. And the one thing that's a little bit unusual with this request is that there is a slight curve in order for those 2 dead-end sections of the street to connect properly, that will push a half-street improvement partly on the adjacent property to the east. Therefore, the applicant early on negotiated and worked with that adjacent property owner to educate them as to what the city codes were going to be required and he would be required to do, and the improvements he'd put in, and how that might benefit them in the future on their property, which is outside of the city limits in Clackamas County, but certainly within our urban growth boundary, and very likely at some point to want to urbanize and will need to build their half of a street connection on their property. And so with that in mind, they were able to secure a needed easement on their property in order to complete the construction of their half-street of improvements. When we always say half-street improvements, it's actually half of the paved street plus enough additional, I think, to give a 20-foot wide paved surface so two-way traffic can function on what is built, although the curb and sidewalk on the other side isn't being built, and there'll be a few feet of additional pavement when they develop the other side. We have some examples of where that has happened, and as long as we do a half-street plus, then two-way traffic works very fine on those streets until the other side is developed properly. The site itself is utilizing a private street internally, and that's because of the nature of the land being landlocked with the width that it is. It's very inefficient to be able to extend a public street, especially if it's going to dead end, which it would have to, and a public right-of-way would require so much right-of-way to meet city standards, you could never develop this property in an efficient manner. Therefore, I'm kind of pointing this out because staff spent hours and hours and hours with countless number of potential property buyers for this site, trying to figure out a suitable and efficient yet marketable development proposal for these 3 little parcels here that are being consolidated into this one subdivision of 6 lots, reconfiguring the current tax lots that are there. And I commend Charlie Clark and his engineering assistants in a pretty good layout that satisfies the fire department's needs for access, with a turnaround at the end that will meet their needs. and provides a good mix of lot sizes, I think, that are a little bit larger. But then again, if you look at the surrounding area, that is the kind of lot pattern that is in this particular area. And so it makes it a bit more compatible. The only incompatible aspect is where were they going to put the internal private road? And they've tried it on both sides. We've seen a plan with it on both sides. I think, I'm not sure, but I think they ended up locating it on the south side, partly due to probably a desire of the person that sold the property to them, which lives to the north, and would rather have
Closer to 14?
The other direction is, I think, the property owner where they purchased it from. So that the drive is currently closer to 14th side of the property. It may line up, I think there's a shadow plat in here as well. And so this current location may line up fairly well with what might happen to the east when that property develops, and so that you don't have as many conflicts with roads. They either need to line up or meet with adequate offsets, and it's hard to know how the property on the east is necessarily going to develop. But it's kind of nice to look at that and think how it would potentially work. The plans here have a nice wide sidewalk coming off of North Oak Street, the public street, internal, adjacent to this private road, that will allow good pedestrian access internally to these lots as if they were on a public street. So I think that's a very helpful thing in how they've tried to work that out, and it also supplies the means of utilities getting into each of the lots that are in the back. There weren't a whole lot of other issues. They've named it Caitland. Is it Caitland Addition or subdivision? And sometimes those names change over time, but that's certainly what they're calling it now. And that's a unique name, so it certainly works for us in that proposal. And I believe, well, I just haven't had time to look at this for a while. I believe they're going to end up with a private street name, and so we were suggesting that they name it Caitland Place. Canby has kind of had a policy in the past of not naming private streets, but that was only based, to my knowledge, on the fact that the street sweeper would accidentally clean the private street. But that's easily solved by erecting a street name sign that has PVT or private along with it, and then they would know that they aren't supposed to do street sweeping. And I think it works out fairly well in addressing if they were to go ahead and have a private street name to it. And so in the final construction plans, we'll make sure that there is a street name, and staff is recommending Caitland Place for it. All stormwater is proposed with dry wells. The public street, there'll be one in Oak Street, and then there'll be one internal to handle the runoff from the private road. And each individual lot will try to retain their, just like every other lot does in Canby, on their own site with swale probably in the rear yard, and these lots will be big enough to do that. I don't think there's anything else that was too unusual about it, so let's stop there.
Questions? Okay. See Mr. Sissel in the audience. I'm going to make an assumption you're going to speak for the people.
Good evening. I've already signed in there, but for the record, I'm Pat Sissel with Sissel Engineering, 375 Portland Avenue, Gladstone. Good evening, Chair Savory and members of the Planning Commission. I'm here with the applicant, Mr. Charlie Clark of Charles Clark Construction tonight. He's proposing this 6-lot subdivision. I apologize for not, I didn't know we didn't have a PowerPoint plan for tonight, or else I would have brought one with me. The proposal is to divide the property into 6 lots, with 2 of the lots fronting on Oak Street. And as Brian mentioned, Oak currently dead ends south of the site and to the north of the site. Now, to the south, it is it's constructed to a 40-foot curb-to-curb width and a 60-foot right-of-way, kind of an old standard for the city of Canby. Then to the north of our site, it's been dedicated as a half of a right-of-way, 30 feet, with 19 feet of pavement. So our goal is to create a transition through the site that ties a 40-foot wide road into a 19-foot wide road. And during the discussion during the pre-application meeting, talking with city staff, it was decided that we discussed 1 lane versus 2 lanes. What's the appropriate way to do this? There was consensus with city staff that they wanted this to be a 2-lane road through the site, which necessitated us to go to the neighbor to the east. And Brian mentioned getting an easement. We actually have a dedication deed that's prepared and signed. The right-of-way dedication hasn't been recorded yet, because if the subdivision doesn't get approved, then there's no sense having that land dedicated as right-of-way. So it's been signed. It can be recorded at any time, but it would be done at the same time as this plat. The 2 documents would go in together. And the goal is to get a 28-foot wide improvement along the frontage of this site. That's a half street of 20 feet plus a travel lane on the other side of center line of 8 feet. So that will be our transition from the 40-foot segment on the south to the 19-foot segment on the north. At the north property line, we'll taper the 18 feet down the 28 feet will taper down to 19 over a several hundred-foot distance. And that's the easement or the dedication needed for that taper is coming from the same property owner. So we've taken care of all of our needs for the frontage. The 2 lots that face Oak are the 2 smallest, Lot 1 and Lot 2. They're both slightly over 7,000 square feet. And they're the wider lots. Access is easy because they front a public street. And so that was the reason for making those lots a little bit smaller and putting the bigger lots back inside the property where you have a narrower driveway, private driveway set up. It might be helpful to have a little more flexibility on the type of home that's being built on the interior of it. The proposal is to place the driveway on the south side of the site. Brian mentioned that it's been proposed both ways. Originally, we did have the private driveway shown along the northern property line. The property owner did want the driveway moved to the south side. That was one reason for moving it. The other reason is that the sanitary sewer in Oak Street is shallow and it flows south towards 14th Avenue. And so it works better from a sanitary sewer standpoint to have the driveway on the south side and put that sanitary sewer in that driveway. It's marginally lower, but every little bit helps. And so it helps get a little more cover over the top of the sanitary sewer pipe. The proposal is that driveway will be a dedicated tract. So these lot areas of 8,000 square feet, it doesn't include that driveway. That driveway is a separate tract. So the sidewalk is placed. It's a little bit difficult to tell at this scale, but the front lot lines for lot 3 and 4 will be 6 inches behind the back of curb or a foot behind the face of curb. So there'll be a sidewalk encroachment onto the front of the lots, as is common with most city streets and can be, that there's a portion of the public sidewalk on the front of the lots. So we've set this private driveway up much like the public streets are set up. It'll be owned in common by lots 3 through 6 that would take access from it. There was some discussion at the neighborhood meeting about the area between the paved surface and the property lines to the south and what should be done with that area. And I think there was general consensus from the neighbors that probably the best thing to do in there is some gravel, something that can be maintained weed-free, easy enough. Don't try to landscape it with something that's going to become a weed patch over the years. So our proposal would be to grade that area behind the curb over to the fence line with gravel, so it can be easily maintained. The stormwater for the lots will all be maintained on the lots as is typical. The private driveway will drain to its own dry well, water quality manhole and dry well, and we'll also be putting a water quality manhole and a dry well in Oak Street to handle any runoff from the new portion of the street. We're going to loop a water line through the site. There's currently dead-end 6-inch mains on both sides. We're going to be putting an 8-inch main across the front and a new fire hydrant in. So it's going to be better water quality for the neighborhoods that are currently on dead-end mains, better fire flow. So that'll be an improvement for the neighborhood. The homes will be a mix probably of 1-story and 2-story homes. There's a market for both. The applicant intends to build on 3 of the lots at this time, but he doesn't have specific plans for either 1-story or 2-story, but we imagine it'll be a mix of both. And you see a mix of both in the neighborhood, although in this neighborhood it's primarily single-story homes. As far as the name, Caitlin's Place, Caitlin is the applicant's daughter, and so we're pretty sure that's a fixed name. It's not going to be changed down the line. So,
Okay.
Brian, you don't have to worry about that. I think it's a pretty straightforward subdivision. If you have any questions about it, I'm happy to answer them at this time.
Any questions?
I do have one.
Okay.
Lot 5. I'm looking at the overall, the aerial view of it with the dotted lines in it. What took place in that lot? Was there some takeover from the northwest side of it, or what happened here? Because I'm seeing the things moved, I think, in the right direction, but I'm curious what's going on with the lot across the property line.
I can't tell you the history of how the property lines arrived at where they're at. There are 3 parcels that make up this subdivision. How that little remnant got back there in the back of Lot 5, I'm not sure.
Is that what it is, too?
It's its own tax lot.
It's kind of, yeah, the piece of, I mean, it's not your property, I see that. Did you take over a piece of it? Because that's what it kind of looks like. From what I'm seeing, it looks like there's a chunk of it that was taken, and it's left this little square in the middle of nothing. Whose is that?
It's a tax lot 2902 is that little remnant, is that little piece that you see in lot 5,
Okay.
in the back of lot 5. The tax lot to the,
So that's its own tax lot?
it's its own tax lot.
Oh, that's neat.
So the one to the east in front of it where lots 1, 3, and 4 are, that's 2901. And then the tax lot to the west is 2903. So and then farther west, that fronts on Maple Street is 2900. So I'm assuming 2901, 02, and 03 all came out of 2900. That's usually the way things are numbered
Right.
on an assessor's map. But how and when or why, I can't tell you.
Okay, fair enough. Is there any development on 2903 at the moment, or is it just a portion of 2900?
It's just a portion of 2900 is what it looks like to me.
So 2900 is developed.
2900 does have a home on it,
Okay,
yes.
so what is it? 2903 is just a portion of that property, and you sucked up 2902 in this development.
That is correct.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. We need to get rid of little oddities like that. That was my question.
All right.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay.
Sorry.
No? Weeds. Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other proponents that would like to speak at this time? Okay. Are there any opponents that would like to speak? Anybody that's neutral? Hence, no rebuttal. So, okay. We'll close the public testimony. And any questions? Derek, John, Sean?
I already went.
I know you did.
I'm good.
Larry? Okay. So I will entertain a motion to approve the request for a 6-lot subdivision suitable for single-family dwellings. That would be SUB 16-02 for Mr. Charlie Clark.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to go ahead and approve 1602 for Mr. Charlie Clark.
I was hoping somebody would do that. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Clark, you have your thing going for you here. Okay, we'll move along to new business. Is there any new business, Brian?
No new business.
Okay, and then we will have final decisions. These are final written findings of previous oral decisions, and there's no public testimony. So I will entertain a motion to have final decision to approve DR 16-03 from Mr. Tom Scott.
So I might mention on that one, we'll be eliminating, since it was approved, subject to waivers, exceptions, however you want to word it, to those 5 ordinance requirements that were indicated. And we've got 4 of those listed as the first 3 conditions, and so we're just going to remove those when we finalize it. I wanted you to know what we'd be doing with that one.
So how do we need to word the motion?
So I guess you would, kind of like the approval was, you would say that subject to us granting the waiver or exception to the 5 ordinance provisions that were pointed out that it doesn't comply with, and therefore remove those. I mean, we only put them in the report so that you would be aware of the need to either require it, which would have denied the application, or waive them, which you ended up doing.
Subject to,
Yeah, subject to the waiver, I guess.
all right, Mr. Chair, I will make a motion to approve DR 16-03 for Mr. Tom Scott with, I forgot it, with the waiver of the 5 ordinance provisions.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. It's done, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Then we will have a final decision for SUB 16-02 for Mr. Charlie Clark. We'll entertain a motion for that.
Come on, guys. Somebody else.
I'll motion that we approve 1602 for Charlie Clark.
Do I have a second?
Second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Mr. Clark, you're good to go.
I'm going to have you sign these. They're not on the fancy paper, but you can still,
Well, I'm not sure then, in that case, that no fancy paper, no signature, Brad. Thank you. So, items of interest from the staff. Next regularly scheduled planning commission meeting is Monday, July 25th. Is that?
right, so you might see if you can poll people, because I know some people said they weren't going to be around at the 25th. Is that correct?
No, the 25th, I think.
Or is that, people are
I won't
still
be here
here?
on the 8th.
Ones who won't be.
I think it was August, yeah.
Okay, so you might all be here for the 25th then. Okay, so we have a design review for Rudnick Electric Signs, who's building a new sign shop, fabrication shop, and his offices on North Township Road. And so we're rushing to get that one forward and done for that. And then I think I sent you an update. I always like to let you know that Laney went home from the hospital on Friday and is doing fairly well. And we hope that she has a speedy recovery, because we miss her every single day.
I bet you do.
And my
I know how that
workload,
shop
and
runs.
I say my workload is more than doubled. That lets you know how much she does. And I don't know if any of you drove by the Tom Scott project or not and noticed that we have new site signage that we purchased. It's an A-frame sign, and they're much more visible. They don't, well, we don't know for sure how much wind they can take, but they don't necessarily blow over as easily. And they're much more durable, and we're hoping that people don't take them. And so we plastered City of Canby property on them, but they can actually even remove those letters if they really try. But they're very common type A-frame signs that you see many other. They're fairly expensive, but staff's hopeful that that will be easier to post those and pick them up, because the other ones would always bend. Nobody could get them in the ground. These don't have to go in the ground. So we think it's going to work a whole lot better, and it was worth the expense just for these two cases to us. And
When
so
are they looking at starting construction, do you know?
I really don't. They haven't said on this one. But I think the ODOT approval is going to come fairly rapidly. I don't think it's going to be that complicated to get their final approval on that. And since they agreed verbally that they agree with it, it'll happen. I think that's... Oh, the other thing I just wanted to mention is when Laney's back, maybe I can get it started before then, not knowing how long she'll be out. See if I can get IT to start working on the iPad purchase. So now that we're in the new fiscal year, And it turned out great because I thought some of you weren't going to be here tonight, and I felt guilty copying so many notebooks, not knowing if they were all going to be used, but they were. So
No need to feel guilty,
that
Brian.
made
No
me
need to
feel better.
Okay, so are there any items of interest from this board for Brian?
Actually, I had one comment, and that was I went and stopped at the McDonald's to get a lemonade and check it out because I wanted to see how the site came out. I have to say that I was really impressed that they extended their driveway curbing that they didn't need to do back for the pump place. So the driveway, they moved it about 8 feet back to accommodate. Remember, they came in and they were asking about it because their trucks sweep in there.
issue they have with it.
And they moved it back to where they got an extra about 8 feet out of it, which I wanted to commend them for that, because they didn't need to do that, but they did it anyways,
Yeah.
and they're being a good neighbor, and I love seeing that. So I wanted to say something about that.
Okay, great. In that case, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I recommend that we adjourn this meeting.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay. We're adjourned.
Great.